Welcome to the Africa Finance Corporation Country and Stakeholder Symposium. We have simultaneous interpretation in French and English. Just click on the interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom screen to choose your preferred language. I'm Mark Edo, and I'm going to be your guide for the next couple of hours, where we will hear from some great speakers in 2 sessions that will give us insights on the power of partnering with AFC to reduce infrastructure deficits, develop natural resources, and catalyze sustainable industrialization. Now, I urge you to start sending in your questions and comments. Let's make this an interactive session, as interactive as possible. You can put your questions in the Q&A box, and make sure you tell us your affiliation and who your question is directed to. Today, let me be the first to say happy birthday, AFC. Congratulations to the Africa Finance Corporation as it reaches its 15th year in operations. That's a huge milestone. And last night at the gala dinner here in Lagos, we heard some powerful testimonies to the instrumental impact the Africa Finance Corporation has and how much transformational effect partnering with AFC can bring to countries and stakeholders. And we saw the new brand that signifies that AFC is the reliable and resilient bridge to a prosperous African future. From a global pandemic to geopolitical upheavals, choked supply chains and credit crisis, the uncertainty of a changing world means that now more than ever, AFC can serve as your trusted partner to African nations looking to build back or indeed forward better as they seek to keep growth on track. For 15 years now, AFC has proven to investors that African infrastructure projects are not only safe investments, but they're very profitable. So let's begin the session now. We'll kick things off at the top. I will now invite the Deputy Governor, Economic Policy at Nigeria Central Bank, Dr. Kingsley Obiora, who's also the chairman of the AFC's board of directors, to give the opening remarks. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much, Mark.
There's a big echo going off. I don't know if somebody can handle it. But as let's go on with my address and hope that some.
Chairman, we can't hear you. Chairman, we can't hear you, I think. I think there may be problems with your microphone. If we could, maybe you're on mute. If someone could check your microphone, these things happen on Zoom. That's why it's always better to be in the room, but sometimes we cannot. So if we can try you again, sir.
So my mic is back on, but I think the problem is the echo.
Yeah, I think there may be someone in your room that also has their microphone on with a machine next to yours. That could be what's happening. So if anybody in your room...
you might have 2 devices on.
Yeah, 2 devices on. Someone in your room has their mic on. Just if there's anyone there, just ask them to mute themselves or their phone. Okay, can we hear you again?
Can we hear you again? Can we hear you again? Can we hear you again? Can we hear you again?
Okay, you want me to try again?
Okay,
Yeah.
want me to try again?
But the echo is still there.
Okay, perhaps maybe whilst we fix that, perhaps we should move on and then we can come back. Usually opening remarks are opening, but with the technical difficulties, perhaps we should move on to the program and then we can come back as you're sorting that out. Okay, so if you would allow me to do that, I will now move on the program. As I said, we heard a very powerful rallying cry to seize the moment and propel Africa to become the engine of growth in a changing world. So it gives me great pleasure to give the welcome address, AFC's President and CEO, Samaila Zubairo. So you've got the floor.
Sorry, it looks like mine is better now.
Oh, it's crystal clear, sir. You have the floor, Chairman.
Sorry, everyone. Sorry again. On behalf of the Board of Directors, management, and staff of the Africa Finance Corporation, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the second annual AFC Country and Stakeholder Symposium. It is my sincere privilege and honor to also acknowledge the distinguished presence of His Excellency Mohamed Bazoum, President of the Republic of Niger, and our many honorable dignitaries, guest speakers, development partners, project promoters, and the wider investor community. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, this year marks a significant milestone in AFC's history as we celebrate 15 years of the corporation's existence. We are proud of the many milestones we have achieved in helping to bridge Africa's infrastructure deficit. These would not have been possible without the support and partnership of the AFC's 33 member countries and our shareholders and stakeholders, who have contributed substantially to the continued success of the corporation. To each one of you, we are immensely grateful and look forward to scaling even greater heights together. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, the annual Country Stakeholder Symposium was born in 2021 as a dedicated forum for engaging with our AFC stakeholders. Through this platform, our aim is to foster a pragmatic and constructive dialogue through which the corporation can continue to be your partner of choice in consistently delivering the solutions that address Africa's infrastructure investment gap in a sustainable way through transformative impact. The theme of this year's Country Symposium, Africa's Energy and Green Transitioning, Unlocking Opportunities for Sustainable Development, could not be more relevant or urgent. The world around us is changing rapidly and in an ever more complicated ways. As a continent, we must realize that Africa is central to the global energy transition and is therefore critical to the future of the global economy. At the AFC,
we can't hear you again. Your mic seems to be muted.
No, it's not. On my end, it's not.
Oh, okay.
At the AFC, we are committed to ensuring that African countries maximize the share of value they capture from their raw materials, including the metals and minerals that are necessary for the global energy transition, most of which can be found in Africa. This can only be achieved through increased processing and value addition on the continent. We are committed to building sustainable and resilient infrastructure that stands the test of time and helps to connect Africa's economies and enhance productivity, create jobs, and improve lives. I am optimistic that today's discussions will further progress our approach on many of these issues, resulting in concrete areas for our partnerships to be developed and leveraged for maximum impact. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, I wish you successful deliberations, and those distinguished guests attending physically, a safe and memorable stay in Nigeria. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Kingsley Obiora, our chairman at Africa Finance Corporation. Now, at the end of the day, it's all about what we build together. Since it launched in 2007, AFC has deployed over $10 billion in over 30 African states. There have been some very exciting projects in areas such as wind energy. AFC is impacting Africa's development positively, and it comes at it with a commercial mindset. Last night, he made a powerful rallying cry for us to seize the moment and propel Africa to become the engine of growth in a changing world. Today, I'd like to invite him to give the welcome address. AFC President and CEO, Samaila Zubairo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mark. And thank you to all the people attending this session. Your Excellency, the President of the Niger Republic, Mr. Mohamed Bazoum, Honorable Mr. Ahmed Djibout, Ambassador Monica Katina Juma, Dr. Vera Sangwe, Executive Secretary UNECA, distinguished guests, AFC shareholders and board members, and my fellow colleagues at the Africa Finance Corporation. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the annual AFC Country and Stakeholder Symposium. Today, AFC marks its 15th anniversary. We celebrate that over these 15 years, we have made some headway in changing the African narrative through investing in projects that deliver significant development impact and shareholder value. Yet, even as we celebrate, we also recognize that our work with you, our stakeholders, has only just begun. This milestone year for AFC marks a period of profound change. The COVID-19 pandemic, along with the conflict in Ukraine, have reinforced supply chain and logistic challenges and set back economic progress. Yet in 2022, we also see significant opportunities for our continent, especially relating to Africa's role in the global energy transition. This requires deliberate and consistent efforts to ensure that the continent's vast mineral wealth, which is so critical in this transition, is utilized to the benefit of all its citizens. Africa is abundant in the mineral and metal resources that will power the global energy transition, and we must make sure that these are extracted in a sustainable and responsible manner. We must also ensure these resources are refined, processed, and manufactured within the continent to create economic growth and livelihoods for African young and growing population. Equally important to us as an institution is ensuring that Africa, and by extension Africans, play a large and important role in the world's shift towards cleaner sources of energy. To this end, AFC is creating a 2 gigawatt renewable energy platform through the aggregation of our core renewable projects, wind, solar, and hydropower, along with new technologies such as batteries, hydrogen, and large-scale desalination plants. To facilitate this, AFC will seed its existing assets such as the Djibouti Wind Farm, Tingrobo Hydro Plant, and the Kabiolika Wind Farm, with development assets generating clean power across the continent. The platform will also seed assets obtained through acquisitions and co-developed through partnerships with reputable renewable energy firms operating in the continent. Africa's development is also impacted by the unprecedented climate change that is forcing a focus on resilience. It is estimated that the continent will need investments worth $3 trillion for climate mitigation and adaptation. It is with this in mind that we at the Africa Finance Corporation have sought creative solutions to help bring in some of the much needed investment to address the impacts of climate change and build the sustainable infrastructure that will last for generations. We have recently expanded our services to include asset management with the launch of our wholly owned subsidiary, AFC Capital Partners, and its inaugural fund, the Infrastructure Climate Resilient Fund. Our aspiration is for ACP to become Africa's leading infrastructure asset manager with a strategic focus on sustainable investments. The firm will be leveraging AFC's investment track record to mobilize institutional capital, which will then be invested in financially rewarding infrastructure investments that meet climate adaptability and resilience criteria. This strategic move compounds AFC's climate and developmental impact on the continent by crowding in private investments for building adaptable and more resilient infrastructure. At AFC, we work to find solutions to Africa's challenges with unrelenting consciousness that the prospects of multiple generations to come will be largely shaped by how our continent collectively handles the twin task of addressing the climate crisis while focusing on development. Our response to these challenges must be African-led, as the issues can only be solved with an understanding of the nuances of our continent and by those with a stake in the outcome. Even though Africans are in line to bear the brunt of the climate crisis, despite historically contributing the least to greenhouse gas emissions, we must embark on a low carbon growth path and mark the transition to a greener economy in a just and pragmatic manner. However, we must not compromise the need to provide affordable and reliable energy access for all Africans. We must instead pivot to exploiting our natural gas reserves to ensure a more sustainable path for growth. In the same process, we should also seek to save the vast forest reserves that we have, which the world needs as carbon sink. As we mark our anniversary, I would like to once again thank you for your participation, particularly from our prospective and existing member countries, our shareholders, who provide us the enabling framework that greatly enhance AFC's ability to drive development across the continent. I look forward to continuing to work together to build the Africa we want and the Africa we deserve. Thank you all for your attendance and attention.
And thank you, Mr. Samaila Zubairu, President and CEO of the Africa Finance Corporation. That concludes the opening remarks and the welcome address. Now we'll go into the panel session. And this one, the first of our two panels today, has the title Unlocking the Opportunities for an African-Made Energy Transition. It'll last about 30 minutes or so. There'll be opportunities to maybe take a couple of your questions at the end. So type them into the chat box right now or the Q&A box. Now, Africa contributes less than 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, yet it bears the brunt of the most devastating impacts of climate change. At the same time, Africa must balance combating climate change with a critical need to industrialize and develop its economies and fulfillment of the UN Sustainable Development. Net zero, Africa is almost already at net zero, but Africa must seize the opportunities of this green transition. And for that, we need, how can Africa draw in an estimated $60 billion of annual investment it needs to ensure everyone power by 20. We're going to talk about that, and we have an excellent lineup of speakers for this first panel. We also have an excellent moderator in the Executive Director and Chief Investment Officer of AFC, Sameh Shenouda. Sameh, take over.
Thank you very much, Mark, and welcome everyone. As Mark said, we're going to have a discussion on unlocking the opportunities for an African-made energy transition. We have a number of panelists that have a lot of wealth in terms of experience and knowledge and a varied view on the different topics we'll discuss. If I may introduce our panelists today, Her Excellency Dr. Monica Juma. She is the Cabinet Secretary in the Ministry of Energy of the Republic of Kenya. She oversees the execution of the mandate of the ministry, which entails provision of clean, sustainable, affordable, reliable, and secure energy services for national development while protecting the environment. Welcome, Your Excellency, Dr. Juma. We have also Dr. Vera Songwe, who is the United Nations Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa. Upon her appointment, she became the first woman to lead the organization in its 60-year history. As an Executive Secretary, Dr. Songwe's reforms have focused on developing and implementing ideas for a prosperous Africa. Welcome, Dr. Songwe, and thank you for being here. We also have Mr. N.J. Ayub, who is Executive Chairman of the African Energy Chamber and CEO of Pan-African Corporate Law Conglomerate Centurion Law Group. Welcome, Mr. Ayub. Good to have you here. We also have Mr. Adrian Mill, who is Managing Director and founder of ESS, an implementation-focused environmental, social, and governance and sustainability advisory services, who has worked in Africa and serving African countries. Adrian, good to have you with us. And then we have Benjamin Atiyah, who is Principal Research Analyst in the Energy Transition Practice of Wood Mackenzie. Adrian, thank you for being here. And finally, we have our Head of Natural Resources at AFC, Mr. Osam Yahen, who will conclude the session at the end of our discussion. Welcome, Osam. I don't want to take too much time in terms of introduction, but the areas that we'd like to have a discussion on are really focused on three questions. One is renewable energy and climate change, and how can we drive integration of renewable energy into a greener Africa? Second is gas as a transition metal, and we'll have a discussion about whether it is a transition metal or not, and different people's views. And finally, a big topic that is known to all of us, but we need to dig a bit deeper into is transition metals, EV, e-mobility. How does it start in Africa? So let's start with renewable energy. Half of Africa's population has no access to power. 600 million people do not have electricity in their homes, in their schools, in their hospitals. However, Africa is blessed with a lot of resources such as wind, a lot of sunshine, a lot of water, and geothermal resources as well. So how do we bridge the gap as African institutions to build the renewables network? We need to seize the opportunity. We have been investing about $5 billion into power every year as a continent. The gap is much bigger than this. We need to invest $60 billion a year. So let me start the first question to Ambassador Juma. Kenya has had a very impressive track record in terms of increasing electricity access in a very short period of time. What are the key success factors for renewable energy adoption and integration in Kenya? Thank you. Is Ambassador Juma not?
I think Monica is with us, but.
Sorry? I don't think she's with us. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Dr. Songwe, we've seen a number of countries that have had a very successful track record in building their renewable capacity. Let's take South Africa as an example. They've had a number of rounds where they were able to achieve very quickly a large number of megawatts and a massive reduction in tariff. How can we apply this? How did they make it work? And how can we apply this to other countries in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Let me just thank AFC for organizing this and for the collaboration that we're having with the Economic Commission for Africa and all the work that we're doing. Thank you. I may have to drop off very quickly, but I'm glad that I was able to be here with you at the beginning. I think this is a very important conversation on Africa's energy access and the transition, unlocking the opportunities. I think sometimes out of every bad thing, some good things need to come out. We're seeing the Ukraine crisis. I think just before the Ukraine crisis, there was a huge conversation around phasing out of fossil fuels. Of course, South Africa, to your question, is one of the largest consumers of coal on the continent. South Africa signed at COP26 the agreement to start phasing out of coal with an $8 billion country platform initiative that was meant to support South Africa as it transitions out. One of the things that South Africa has done and done well, of course, is it put in place very early and very quickly a good regulatory environment for renewable energy systems, opened the markets, created market conditions for that to happen. I think that the South Africa example tells us two things. It tells us, one, if you do the right things, it works, but you must continue to do the right thing, because as we've seen in South Africa, we've got run into a little bit of a chokehold because reforms and the legislative environment have weakened a little bit, and so investments have shrunk in South Africa. They are coming back again. I think there is a lot more discussion now about how we, and now maybe with the conversations on the $8 billion and phasing out of coal, because you need resources, right, to be able to do this. South Africa, when it opened up, particularly to renewable and solar energy systems, had one of the best procurement processes for it, crowded in some of the best investments in the sector. But the sort of price adjustment, if you're going to do a private sector business, you must ensure that you have passed through tariffs so that those who are in the sector are also making have the right returns. South Africa surely is a country that can provide that, of course, with the kinds of inequities that South Africa has. And that's, I think, the challenge for many, is how do you ensure that those who can afford it are passed on the market reflective price. But for those that you have to spend the last mile, what is the regulatory environment and regulatory framework within which you have to design energy access and energy transitions? And that is, I think, a problem that is plaguing almost every country on the continent. Most of our countries, when you go to the cities, we have 70, 80, 90% access to energy. But the minute you start sort of getting out of the city and into the rural areas, we are still struggling with how we do last mile infrastructure and ensure that we take access to them. So I think something that we need to learn and look at is then distributed energy systems, right? Because pulling transmission lines is expensive, as we all know. On our continent, habitations are very sparse. So what can one do with sort of distributed energy systems, which are in that domain, a lot more favorable when you look at renewables, and how can we put in place regulation that makes that work? I think we have some good examples in Morocco, in Senegal, where we have some distributed systems that are working well, and maybe we can build on them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Songwe. Benjamin, how can we apply, we mentioned distributed energy. Is this achievable in all of African countries, or is there a way that we can expand it? Because these are usually smaller projects. So how can we scale up distributed energy?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different segments. And again, let me just thank AFC for the session, and congratulations on 15 years. There's a couple different pieces here, and we can kind of try to touch each of them at a very high level. But distributed systems take a few different forms. So we can have everything from very small standalone solar home systems to integrated mini grid systems that are typically hybrids between solar and typically batteries or distributed diesel genset. We could also have grid connected commercial and industrial solar that actually could be feeding power back into the grid or supplemented by grid power. It may reduce the need for storage or diesel genset. And then, of course, you then start to move into larger scale applications like off-grid mines and off-grid sort of larger industrial facilities that, may be procuring megawatt scale power on a captive basis as well. So each of those segments has very different sort of financing requirements, regulatory requirements, and sort of drivers for scale. But I think the thing that's important here to the point of your question is, yes, many of these assets are distributed, they're smaller, and they may not reach sort of the minimum ticket size for some of the larger top-down investors looking into the market. There are some really innovative platforms right now that are working to aggregate projects and create secondary markets for those projects. So you may be able to develop a portfolio of assets that can distribute risk, and then also aggregate the ticket size to be much larger, and then sold once the projects have been executed, once the projects have kind of passed the regulatory and even sort of technology hurdles where they still exist for some investors, and then basically be able to offload those assets to a comfortable, typically sub-commercial or close to commercial asset manager who will hold those projects and then actually be able to recycle that capital back into the market. So the cross-boundary C&I platform, the cross-boundary energy access platform are also two very good examples of that. That has happened on a pretty limited scale across the region so far. So there's definitely a lot of work still to be done on what creative financing mechanisms can be used to scale finance and development capacity in the distributed segment. I did also just want to add quickly to touch on the previous question. There are some lessons from the utility scale procurements that have been successful in the continent that actually also apply to the distributed sector. So I think one of the things that can be done there is basically laying out series of procurements up front. So in the utility scale segment, that looks like South Africa's REAP rounds being announced in advance and having a regular cadence. Obviously, as we all know, that has sort of slowed down over the past years, but in the early days of the program, the regular cadence and predictability of new rounds of offer gave developers and investors a lot of confidence and allowed them to plan their supply chains out in advance. There are a lot of sort of aggregated commercial and industrial scale procurements, typically for multinationals like Coca-Cola or AB InBev, where some of that lesson has been sort of taken on, basically, where you can say we have many procurements, we're not doing them all at once, but we can plan the supply chain, plan the financing, plan the development out. That helps bring developers down the learning curve. There are a few others as well, but I'll stop there for the sake of time.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Ahmed.
Thank you. Adrian, the gap is big, $60 billion a year to get electricity access to all Africans by 2030. How do you think this financing gap can be bridged?
Thank you, Sami. And again, echoing everyone on congratulations to AFC for 15 years. Look, obviously, there's a lot that can be done and improved to attract that capital. You know, being involved with not just AFC, but developing, you know, addressing ESG, environmental, social, and governance and sustainability issues across the continent. We've been quite fortunate to see what works and what doesn't, and some things that have really become obvious is beyond the very obvious of encouraging partnerships with DFIs and AFC and others, is that there's a need for de-risking. And I think my esteemed colleagues previously have sort of mentioned that. De-risking is key. Africa, very sadly and perhaps unfairly, is painted with the same brush that it is risky, and clearly that's changing at a massively accelerated rate. It's very important that we sing that from the rooftops. It's that it's open for business, and that, you know, the risks are being managed and de-risked very rapidly. But obviously, being an ESG and sustainability expert, I bring this always back to green transition, sustainable development. And I think one of the key things that we often forget around this discussion is that the green transition will inherently create a type of ESG or sustainability trade barrier. And Africa needs to account for that. You know, it's a barrier that the West will happily use, and if we are not proactive in ensuring that all of our projects have the green credentials and not the green washing, which we so often see across the world. This is not obviously limited to Africa. The West has that as well. But I think that will be a very key point for us to really address, though, to be proactive in addressing those potential ESG and sustainability trade barriers, so that that is not, you know, preventing us from growing at scale.
Thank you, Adrian. I'd like to move now to the topic of gas as a transition fuel source, and the question is to Mr. Ayuk. But before I ask the question, I'd like to set the scene. We have seen in the last month the geopolitical scene change significantly with the war in Ukraine. Us at AFC and elsewhere in Africa have always been saying that we have a lot of reserves, of gas reserves. We should take advantage of that, and we should build the infrastructure to be able to either export it or monetize it locally. Now, what's happening now in the world is strengthening that position, that we are seeing, for example, a country like Germany yesterday starting to ration gas. And the war in Ukraine exposed how a large number of countries rely on a very few sources of their gas supply. So in our view, this is an opportunity for Africa to utilize these resources and to expand, to grow the supply network into other countries, and also locally to monetize the gas into industry. So the question to you, Mr. Ayuk, is how can we take advantage of the situation? How can we monetize our gas quickly? And especially for the countries that have large reserves, how can we be proactive? Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me again. Happy 15 to AFC. This is an amazing moment for all the good people, and my good friend Osam and Samalia. You could not have been at any better moment leading this organization. I do believe, though, gas is an amazing opportunity for Africa. It's the cleanest form of fossil fuels, and also it's also something that we have argued for a long time, that gas is green. I think this moment, with even the EU saying gas is green, that it has to be backed with the right kind of financings for African states. It's not just enough for us to say gas is green or gas monetization. we need to close deals. We need to create that environment for gas master plans to get off the shelf and start with implementation. There is no reason why last month I have to go to Niger to get the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline back on track again. We should be also looking at a trans-African gas pipeline. Yes, at the same time, we might be able to get gas into Europe, but we have to also look at getting gas into Africa, using gas technologies for a lot of African companies that are already operating all of these gas byproducts, and at the same time, condition a lot of that with different kind of renewables, whether it is building up solar or wind farms or tying that to hydrogen, which we still have this great potential. So it is an amazing moment, but it needs to be backed up by the right kind of financing that is going to drive into this. And in this same vein, with this same kind of advantage of gas, it is time for us to look at that African gas economy more. I'm not a big fan of everybody saying, let's just get gas to Europe. We need to get gas into Africa to solve our problems around 600 million with no access to energy. Gas can also help us solve our problems with clean cooking technologies with 900 million in how we can have small, mid-sized African companies really driving this, and gas can be a great addition to what we're doing. At the same time, looking at clean energy sources that come into the mix.
Thank you very much, Adrian. A bit of a controversial question. Does increased production and supply of gas contradict with Africa's commitment to reducing gas emissions?
Well, in short, it does. There's a sincere, issue with a fossil fuel versus non-fossil renewable sources. But look, Africa. As an immigrant myself to Africa, more than 12 years, lived here. Africa has a right to develop all of its sources, including fossil fuels. And I think everyone should recognize that. However, it's very important to focus on climate-friendly approaches. I mean, that means that while we can also focus on fossil sources as a transition, renewables are clearly the way to go in many aspects. Renewables will inevitably be cheaper when they're produced at scale. And we only need to look at solar over the last 5 years to see the price dropping remarkably, and it will continue to do so. And storage is key, obviously, to this whole discussion, because renewable sources typically have peaks and troughs. So storage is a key part of this. But I guess the key here is where's the focus got to be? The focus has got to be on zero emissions, low climate, and reducing the impact on biodiversity. And where fossil fuels need to be used, and I stress, need to be used in an African context, cannot agree more with NJ's point on this, there needs to be a very clear transition and exit strategy, right? So I give an example of gas to hydrogen, right? I mean, they're quite similar infrastructures. You could very easily adapt them, very rapidly and without major refitting expense. It's important that we do these kind of things. Climate impacts really affect Africa disproportionately. I mean, and Africa is the least capable of addressing them. And on top of that, we have the assets, the biodiversity assets that the West, by comparison, has to address. They need to rehabilitate the land that they destroyed over the past 200 years, whereas Africa has this opportunity to protect. And we just need to look at places like Gabon, which are always, held up as one of the best places in the world for protection of biodiversity assets. And I'll leave a point here, to consider for everyone. If we're talking about any type of asset, why are we not talking about protecting it? And maybe if you do a project, why not protect the same or larger project, finance the protection of the same or larger footprint elsewhere? I think that's the way to go. But I cannot stress enough that transition is key, and having that plan around transition certainly from the gas perspective, is very much part of it.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I'd like now to move to the third topic that we'd like to discuss today, which is the e-mobility question. Energy transition is metal intensive, and Africa is, in some cases, the largest, in other cases, the second largest continent that has available resources, available minerals and metals. If you take DRC, for example, DRC has copper and cobalt, which are essential ingredients for the building of batteries. There are also more specialized minerals, such as lithium, that is readily available on the continent. Now, if you think of a 1 terawatt of power that is being produced by a gas turbine, it is about a third of the metal that you need to produce the same amount of power from a solar project, and about a quarter of the amount of metals for wind. Now, the challenge with Africa is that the reserves are there, but we are only mining the metals and exporting them, and all the value add is being produced elsewhere. So the question to Dr. Songwe is, how can we capture that value chain? How can we move up, maybe all the way to the battery, or maybe a few steps up the chain? Thank you.
Thank you again, and yes, I forgot. Happy 15th anniversary to the team. I see Smiler there. Thank you and congratulations. And yes, I agree. Also, there would not a better time for you to be leading this organization together, of course, with AFC, Afri-Exim Bank, and African Development Bank, and Badea, and many others. The Economic Commission for Africa did a study with Bloomberg on the use of battery technology. And how we can do more, and we do need more electricity on our continent. One of the things that we came out with was clearly that, you know, you have the exports of cobalt, and DRC has 70% of the world's cobalt. The exports of cobalt today bring DRC about $7 billion. The cobalt export market is about $11 billion. If you go up the value chain from cobalt to electric vehicles, it ends at electric vehicles, or there may be more things one can do with that. It's a $1.7 trillion market. So exactly as you said, you know, it's a $1.7 trillion market. Africa essentially is taking $7 billion out of that market. We can certainly do better. We have a lot of the minerals. We have all the minerals that we need to do that. In the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, what we're trying to do is work with South Africa, work with Gabon, work with Burundi, because they have the nickel, the magnesium, and the platinum that you need to be able to move from an $11 billion to a $1.7 trillion industry. What we're doing now is trying to see how we get to battery precursors. That's about $271 billion market size, and to see whether we can bring together the different companies. We're now working with the Japanese, we're working with the Germans to bring in technology. That is where Africa, I think, our fortress sometimes is how we can crowd in the technology that we need. But once we have the technology, the cost of producing, the cost of transformation is not that complicated. So we're working, and hopefully with the DRC and Zambia, by the way, because we're doing it in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, but also to show that for some of these things, we can bring our countries together. Our studies show that it's much cheaper. It's actually 30% cheaper to produce battery precursors in DRC than it is to produce in the United States, and 20% cheaper to do them in DRC than it is to do them in China. So one will wonder why, you know, if it was from a cost basis, we should be doing them here. From an access to raw material, we should be doing them here. From a labor cost perspective, yes, DRC is slightly more expensive than China, but I think if you put in everything, DRC becomes also cheaper. So I think it really is about now policy. Is the policy environment right? Is there the leadership to take it forward? And we're happy to say that in DRC and Zambia, we see the right kind of leadership with the private sector investors, AFC included, Afri-Exim Bank, and the rest that are around the table. We believe that we can maybe make this happen and begin to show that Africa can get into the transformation business. But let's not forget, Botswana is already doing that with its minerals, right? So we already have, I think, some good examples. In the area of electric vehicles, we expect to have 60 million electric vehicles on our roads by 2040 globally, a lot of that in China and the United States. But we can see that South Africa, Morocco, and to some extent Rwanda are beginning to get into the business of producing electric vehicles. The Economic Commission for Africa just did a study that showed that we need 2.2 million trucks to actually make the AFCFTA effective. If one looks forward that these trucks are all going to be electric trucks, then you can begin to see the demand for that. And I think the huge transformation, job creation, and prosperity leading kinds of markets that we could have on our continent, if only we had the right policy environment, which we hope we have now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I would like to ask Osam, my colleague who heads natural resources, to give us a bit of a conclusion. We've heard a lot of interesting things about each of these topics. We've heard about regulatory environment, about enabling the environment, about the need for financing. The question is, after 15 years of existence, how can AFC see itself as a catalyst to unlock the value in these three areas? Osam?
Thank you, Sameh. As was discussed on the panel, Africa is endowed with an abundance of natural resources. This positions the continent as a very important player in the green energy transition. So over the last 15 years, AFC has invested over $1 billion in mining and oil and gas projects, which are directly relevant for unlocking the untapped opportunities that will lead to social economic development on the continent. So we have invested in gold, copper, cobalt, bauxite, manganese, and potash mining projects. We've also funded the development of the largest oil and gas projects on the continent, which obviously contributes positively as a catalyst for unlocking the opportunities which have been discussed by the panelists. So AFC's increased focus on the African energy transition is a unique opportunity, we believe, to take a leading position in providing funding, especially in the growth of the mineral categories that will support the low carbon energy technology development, industrialization, and job growth. So in the oil and gas sector, we believe that this is going to remain a very important sector for us. We invest responsibly in the sector by pursuing less carbon intensive and greener opportunities to decarbonize our portfolio. So as an example, in our asset reviews, we focus on opportunities that utilize decarbonization technology to reduce emissions associated with hydrocarbon production. We're also increasingly more selective and focused on strategic investments, focusing on downstream links to gas development and monetization for power generation and industrial uses. In the mining sector, on the other hand, we will continue to focus on playing a catalytic role in primarily through providing alternative financing solutions that are relevant in the African mining context. So specifically this year, we'll be rolling out a royalties and streaming financing platform for precious and EV metal projects, so lithium, copper, cobalt, manganese, graphite, etc. And this platform approach, we believe, will serve as a means of de-risking projects and unlocking the required capital to complete development projects. So we recognize, Sameh, that the largest requirements for capital in the African mining space is in the earliest stages of projects. So going forward, we'll also leverage our in-house project development capabilities. We will increase early stage funding of strategic projects in the mining space. We believe that this PD intervention would considerably de-risk and unlock a value in high quality projects in which we're embarking on the continent. So finally, we believe that in the medium to longer term, renewables will play a much important role in the energy mix. That's clear and that's given. We have an investment approach that's focused in the renewable space on electric, that believes in a larger role of renewables energy in the electric supply chain in Africa. So we see this especially around the off-grid space with solar home systems and to a limited degree in captive generation in the industrial sector. CEO has mentioned all the investments which we've done in the in the renewable space, the hydro generation in Nigeria, Cameroon, and Ivory Coast. In addition, we've developed and financed wind farms in Djibouti and Cape Verde. And we're also in advanced discussion to acquire additional renewable assets, which we believe will enhance our credentials in this very important space. But one more and last point on renewables, in our renewables intervention. We see a larger number of mines and industries which are located in very remote locations outside the network grid. So AFC is now working with our technical partners to identify and fund solar energy generating facilities in these establishments in order to be able to complement the fossil fuel generation which is utilized in these facilities. So Simon, these are some of the, really a summary of the important interventions which we're embarking on the energy transition in the oil and gas, mining and renewable space, which AFC not only has actively engaged in, but also helped us to be a catalyst over the last few years and going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Osam. I want to take the opportunity. We've covered three sectors, three topics, sorry. We've had a few interesting interventions from the panelists. I'd like to, even though there are a few questions, I think we've run out of time, so apologies for that. I want to take the opportunity to thank our panelists for their presence, for their interventions, and for the wealth of information that they shared with us. I'd like to thank Osam as well for giving us a view of what AFC has done and what AFC can do. And thank you very much for your time. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Sameh, and thank you again to all your excellent panelists. So what are the benefits of membership and equity investment in AFC, and how do you go about it? Here to articulate and illustrate that is AFC's Executive Director and Head of Financial Services, Sanjeev Gupta.
Lagos, thank you very, very much for obviously attending our second country symposium. From our side, as you can well imagine, it's an honor and a privilege for us to be able to address you today. We were hoping that we would have an actual in-person event this year, but we felt that given the continuing challenges that the world has, it would be best to have largely what it is today, a virtual event. You would have heard from my colleagues and also from the previous panel discussion what a phenomenal story Africa Finance Corporation has developed into. I mean, I myself have been working with AFC for the last 7 years, and it doesn't cease to amaze me what has been achieved in a very short 15-year period. Whether you look at it from a profitability history, whether you look at it from a dividend-paying record, whether you look at it from the impact that it has created on the continent, and indeed the profile that the institution has managed to create globally among investors, you have to accept that this is indeed an institution today that should make all of us in Africa extremely proud. What makes me proud, and AFC generally very proud, is all of this has actually been achieved in the space of 15 years with what is perhaps, arguably, Africa's best talent pool. If you look at the people who work for AFC, the number of years they've been working, the innovation that they have brought into the market, you've got to take your hat off and say thank you to these people. And I really want you to recognize the contribution of purebred African talent behind the success of the institution. Because indeed, that's what AFC is. It is an institution that was funded by African capital for a change, and it was managed and continues to be managed and run by African talent. And which is perhaps why the institution has managed to do so much, because it's really the men of the soil who understand the reality on the ground. So from our side, I think it would be fair to say that we believe that all the building blocks that one needs in terms of talent, products, investor support, governance, management is in place. But we also know that Africa's needs are so huge, so large, so big, that what got us here today is not going to get us where we want to be. Because the hopes, the aspirations, the future, indeed, of almost 2 billion Africans depend on quality access to infrastructure, to access to reliable energy, and to be able to operate in an environment where business can operate. And that is the opportunity and the challenge in front of us. Because we, as Africans, as an African institution, it is our tryst with our own destiny. And that destiny is for us to create. So today, being Africa's largest infra financing company is not good enough for us, because as much as we are very proud and happy and content with what's been achieved, the size of the challenge ahead means that we will have to work more and more with Africa's decision makers, because we cannot operate in isolation. So it's very pleasing for us, and I want you to note this, that as we speak today, our investor base is a combination of African countries and African private sector. Our membership base has grown now to be 33 countries, which means 33 countries on the continent support us, has recognized us, and has given us access to work in their countries to make a difference. You heard about the innovation that is going on in the company around how we are addressing the environmental challenges. You will hear more after I finish now about how we are addressing the challenge around infrastructure and how it needs to be climate resilient, so that a problem, which is the climate problem, that Africa didn't create does not become a problem for Africa's entrepreneurs. So our own infrastructure buildup, you will see, will address the challenge that we have with the climate and the resiliency that therefore has to be brought into our infrastructure. Now, why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this because, very honestly, as we seek to continue to be innovative, to be able to develop what is required, to be able to provide the expertise that governments and businesses need for infrastructure to happen, for industrialization to happen, for jobs to be created, we need collaboration. We need partnerships. We need to work with each and every country and their key decision makers. Because if we don't connect, if we don't cooperate, if we don't collaborate, we will not do justice to the challenge ahead. And that is why I think I would end by firstly thanking all our investors, all our member countries for the continuing support, the love, the affection that they give to us. But I would also very strongly put on the table that Africa has got 54 countries today, and we still have another 20-odd countries who needs to join the fold of AFC. Not because AFC per se needs them. Yes, of course we do, because without that partnership, we can't contribute. But the countries themselves who are not members yet should try and understand how we can make a difference to their development agenda. So one of the requests that I would make to the audience here, particularly representatives of our investors and our member countries, is please help to spread the word of AFC, because it's only through your support, through your goodwill, that AFC's relevance will be understood better, and hopefully, therefore, the impact of what we do will be that much more significant and relevant to Africa's needs. I thank you again very, very much for your time. I'll hand over to the moderator. You will be taken into a very, very exciting session after this, and wish you luck and hope to be in touch during the year with you and do more business with you. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Sanjeev Gupta, our Executive Director and Head of Financial Services at AFC. Always very succinct and straight to the point. Membership in AFC is the way to go. All African nations should join AFC, and together we should take the road to climate resilient infrastructure. That is indeed, as Sanjeev said, the topic of our next panel. Now, in November this year, the UN Climate Change Conference will take place on African soil. COP27 will be in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. This second and final panel will look at the road to COP27 and will examine new approaches to climate resilient infrastructure in Africa that AFC is championing. African infrastructure financing gap is estimated to be around $170 billion per year, plus an additional $15 billion per year required for adapting to the impacts of climate change. So how can we access the various diversified sources of funding, knowing that adaptation could reach up to $50 billion annually by 2050? The moderator for this interesting panel is Ayan Adam. She is the Senior Director and CEO of AFC Capital Partners, AFC's asset management company that plans to raise $2 billion to fund infrastructure projects in Africa that will make it more resilient to climate change. Ayan.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you very much indeed. And it's just great to be here at our 15-year anniversary, and for also to discuss for the most important infrastructure developer financier, what is resilience? Because infrastructure resilience is about climate proofing our infrastructure and our development. So as I think Mark introduced the panel, we have an amazing panel. We will be short, so I will go and introduce the panel. So in this session, we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to hear from the country first, and that is our high delegation from the country of Niger. And we have His Excellency, the Minister of Finance, and that is Mr. Ahmed Jidout. His Excellency, the Minister of Finance, we will ask him questions about what are the priorities at the country level. Then we will move on to Ambassador Seni Nafo. We'll talk about politics. What's the climate politics telling us? How do we navigate the climate politics? How does adaptation get financed? We will and let me introduce Ambassador Seni Nafo. If for those of you who are in Africa and who are in the climate, you would know him. He has been the Africa head of group of negotiators. He has been living the last 10 years and was a very key force in supporting African countries to join the Paris Agreement. So we will hear from him about what's the road to COP. I also would like to introduce Dr. Anya Gaborochi. Anya is someone who is also she's a doctor. She has a background in engineering and chemistry. She started her career in the oil and gas industry, and she is now in the climate side. So that trajectory has taken her from being an engineer in an oil and gas field to looking at adaptation issues, from heading the largest water network to being at the Green Climate Fund, where she was the Deputy Director of Adaptation and Resilience. And more recently, she was the Head of Investor Relations at the Green Climate Fund, and recently joined AFC Capital as one of its board members. And we will go to then Alexander Chabaro. Alexander is the founder of Climate Finance 2050, through which he has been working on a number of climate sustainability issues. He is involved in the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investors and is one of the architects that have put together several tools. Previous to that, he's a banker from many institutions, including Lazard in France. So he comes with the financial background, the insurance background, and what are the tools? How do we assess resilience? There is a lot of talk about the disclosures to financial risk. If all these financial risks are disclosed, none of Africa's assets will be actually insurable. So this is why AFC has taken the mantle under Samaila Zubero, our CEO, to say, let's climate-proof resilient and let's climate-proof development, because the climatic shocks have actually a significant dent on GDPs of the countries. There is up to 20% loss of GDP because there is one drought, one weather event, or a significant flooding that happens in an economy. And in Mozambique, it was much more than 20%. So I think, and we are going to end with my colleague, Rajiv Mahajan. He is the head of project finance at the Green Climate Fund. I've worked with Rajiv. Rajiv has been instrumental in de-risking using concessional finance a number of opportunities, and he has underwritten $1.5 billion worth of transactions where he has de-risked and has provided blended structures that has enabled around 5 to 6 billion mobilization. Rajiv was in the India Infrastructure Development Finance Corporation before the GCF. So that is the panel. So we will start with our honorable guest, His Excellency, the Minister of Finance, and I will ask him to outline as the first question, what are the climate challenges that Niger faces? And then we will lead into try and looking at that from the science, from the politics, as well as from the financing. Thank you very much. His Excellency, Minister of Finance, will address us through a video recorded. Mark, back to you.
Géographique du Niger le rend particulièrement vulnérable au changement climatique. Le Niger étant un pays sahélien enclavé au cœur de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, reste naturellement vulnérable aux climats extrêmes et variables. D'ailleurs, selon les scénarios qui sont analysés, il est prévu que les températures au Niger augmentent de 2 degrés à 4,6 degrés d'ici 2080, avec des températures très élevées et davantage de températures extrêmes dans le sud-ouest du pays. Les tendances donc en matière de précipitations sont très incertaines, très imprévisibles, et les prévisions vont d'une légère baisse à une forte hausse de la quantité totale de précipitations annuelles. Cela étant, ces changements climatiques auront un impact très significatif, très important sur les infrastructures, tant d'un point de vue de leur niveau, mais aussi d'un point de vue de leur qualité, à cause d'événements climatiques extrêmes. En particulier, la hausse des précipitations peut entraîner des inondations au niveau des routes, ou bien, de l'autre côté, la hausse des températures aussi peut provoquer des dégradations plus rapides des routes, telles qu'on l'observe aujourd'hui, des ponts et autres structures de protection, ce qui est de nature, bien sûr, à entraîner des coûts de maintenance et des remplacements très élevés de ces infrastructures. À titre d'exemple, quand on regarde l'année 2019, les pluies torrentielles se sont abattues sur l'essentiel du territoire nigérien, ayant entraîné des pertes importantes, notamment 256 000 personnes ont été touchées et 22 000 maisons ont été détruites, avec un nombre considérable de décès. L'exposition aussi du PIB à des vagues de chaleur étant prévue dépasser d'environ 1,7% en 2000 à 6% en 2080. Étant donné que les infrastructures routières ou les infrastructures de transport de manière générale au Niger, il est donc par conséquent important à ce que nous puissions davantage renforcer les investissements en matière d'infrastructures, notamment des infrastructures qui soient résistantes à ces changements climatiques dans la perspective de réduire, comme je le disais, les coûts de maintenance. En ce qui concerne les différents mécanismes ou outils pour mesurer le risque et la vulnérabilité au changement climatique des infrastructures, il faut noter qu'au Niger, l'évaluation des risques au changement climatique est couramment documentée par une institution qui a créé pour s'occuper de cette question, en particulier le Conseil national de l'environnement pour un développement durable. Ces conseils met en œuvre des études thématiques qui sont souvent sectorielles, notamment quand on prend l'exemple, il y a eu des études dans le secteur de l'agriculture et de l'hydraulique qui ont été réalisées et suivies de stratégies sectorielles en conséquence sur la question de la résilience climatique. Une autre étude sur la vulnérabilité et l'adaptation au changement climatique spécifique au secteur des infrastructures de transport a été réalisée par le même conseil en 2020. Cette étude a permis de montrer comment une augmentation des températures et une recrudescence des phénomènes catastrophiques climatiques extrêmes impactent négativement et réduisent la régularité, la performance et le développement du secteur des transports. Les principales contraintes en lien avec la problématique du changement climatique empêchant le développement du secteur du transport, notamment la non-disponibilité des normes nationales et de la carte géotechnique des matériaux de construction, des routes et des voies ferroviaires prenant en compte la dimension changement climatique, l'insuffisance des investissements liés aux paramètres favorisant le développement de la résilience des infrastructures de transport et enfin la faible valorisation de l'information climatique dans le processus de construction et de mise en œuvre des infrastructures de transport.
To have a comprehensive and integrated approach. So we're very happy to be working with you. We actually believe, but we should seek $5 billion in Sharm, not 2, but 5 to start with. And we'll be very happy as the African group, as board members in the Green Climate Fund to help you achieve that. Thank you, Ayan.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Seni. I have been told that when I introduce you, some of the members have not heard. This is Ambassador Seni Nafo, one of the gurus in the African group of negotiators, started the process at a very young age. He has been very committed to highlighting the issues of Africa. He headed the whole group of African group of negotiators as its chair. And today he also sits in the board of the Green Climate Fund, a seat with Egypt. So that is Ambassador Seni Nafo, very crucial member that have brought African countries to the Paris Agreement when he headed the African group of negotiators. So that's Ambassador Seni Nafo. I think I want to move on to Dr. Anya. Dr. Anya, I have introduced her. I think that has been heard. I just want to confirm that an important member, somebody who has traveled the oil to climate journey, somebody very well known in the adaptation and the resilience cycles. So Dr. Anya, the question I have for you, can you highlight what are the scientific underpinning of climate resilience, and what are the evidence on climate resilience and how it affects the African infrastructure? And can you comment on what His Excellency, the Minister of Finance, has said about Niger and what Ambassador Seni said? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ayan, and it's a great honor for me to be part of this discussion as a new board member of AFC Capital. And also I'd like to congratulate AFC on its 15th birthday and the tremendous achievements so far. We look forward to many more. So as was said earlier, despite Africa's low contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, indeed Africa is being very hard hit by a range of climate risks. And in the discussion that follows around infrastructure, I think the minister also highlighted it's the floods, it's the droughts, it's the severe storms, which according to the IPCC report, we can expect to become ever more frequent and more severe. This combined with sea level rise is a particular threat to coastal zone regions. And I think we've seen already that Africa's climate is changing quite dramatically with the increase of the rate of cyclones hitting, for example, the eastern seaboard of Mozambique, Madagascar, Tanzania. We're seeing, 2 cyclones, one after the other within 3 weeks, hitting that eastern seaboard. This is completely unprecedented. I think we cannot expect, what extreme events will happen. We have to prepare for them. We have to adapt to those possible extreme events. We have to build infrastructure to protect people from those extreme events that are coming. So just to talk a little bit more then about how these climate impacts, which really hit Africa's poorest people the hardest, impacts on their lives and their livelihoods. These impacts also affect the entire national economy of a country, as was mentioned earlier, in terms of Mozambique's economy being affected by each flood. The Minister of Niger also referred to the fact that floods, high temperature, these precipitation increases are affecting Niger's economy. The key economic sectors that are being affected of these, I'd say, infrastructure is absolutely at the top of the list. We include all types of infrastructure systems, including energy, telecommunications, transport, water and sanitation. All of these sectors and all of this infrastructure becomes vulnerable with extreme events. Now, when we talk about adaptation and resilience, we talk about people's ability to adapt to climate change through adapting their lifestyles, through adaptation technologies. Farmers, for example, adapting to drought by planting more drought-resilient crops, perhaps changing the types of crops that they choose to plant. But I'd like to stress here that resilience can apply to people, to communities, and to systems, such as infrastructure networks. So infrastructure, well, we have to think of resilience at every level as we start to build resilience in each economy in Africa. The World Bank has stated that already that disasters cause damages of about $18 billion per annum to Africa's infrastructure. However, if we also look at the ongoing impacts and consequences on people's lives, those damages to the immediate infrastructure of $18 billion, the total impact rises to $390 billion per annum. Now, conversely, when we invest in infrastructure resilience, there's also good news in this multiplier effect, because for every $1 that we invest in resilient infrastructure in low and middle income countries, again, these are figures from the World Bank, there is $4 in benefit for each $1 invested. So there's an enormous payback in thinking about and investing in resilient infrastructure upfront. What do we mean by resilient infrastructure? It's the ability of infrastructure systems to function and to meet users' needs during and after a natural hazard, avoiding costly repairs, avoiding all these wide-ranging consequences for people, for livelihoods, for the national economy, helping to protect the productivity of companies to keep producing, protecting these consequences on people's lives, such as children's schooling, people being able to reach hospitals and clinics, and so on in the aftermath of a disaster. So the investments that we need to make in resilient infrastructure starts with physical design, which may include the upfront costs of a project, but it also feeds through into the management and governance of the infrastructure systems. The minister very much referred to Niger's increased cost of maintenance, for example, to recognize that its infrastructure networks, because of climate change, costs more in terms of operation and maintenance. We need to think about building resilient institutions so that when a disaster hits, the country's institutional framework is up to the job of dealing with both the disaster and its aftermath and its impacts. We need to think in terms of regulations, the incentives, the decision-making structures which can respond to disasters and to build that resilience in upfront. And then finally, of course, the financing, which is an incredibly important element in all of this. But for that, I'd then like to hand back to Ayan and for the rest of the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anya. That was very well explained. And, you learn a lot more. It was very succinct and extremely well explained. So let me turn to Alexandra Chavarro. Alexandra, let me turn to you with respect to your work at this point with the Coalition of Climate Resilient Infrastructure. We want to talk implementation. So as you know, we have launched, I would say, the first Africa Infrastructure Climate Resilient Fund. This was very important as outlined by the entire senior leadership in terms of its importance. AFC is an infrastructure builder. And as Anya described, we have to integrate that so that we're not going to pass on to the future generation infrastructure that is not proof to the climate change. There will be costs associated with that, and we will try and address that at the end. So maybe we can talk to you a little bit about what are some of the tools used, what's the methodology, how do you outline, where do you start, are there differences between greenfield and brownfield? What are some of the approaches to mitigating physical climate risks in infrastructure? A little bit on insurance, and what are the ways can Climate 50 and ICRF work together on climate resilient infrastructure? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayan. And thank you to all of you. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And indeed, congratulations on AFC's 15 years. of operation and success. So my name is Alex Chavarro. I'm a strategic advisor with the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment, which is a private sector-led initiative that was launched in September 2019 on the occasion of the UN General Assembly by a number of convening institutions, including Willis Towers Watson, the UK-based insurance group, the World Economic Forum, the Global Coalition on Adaptation, and the World Resources Institute. The purpose of CCRI, as its acronym is now known, is to develop, as you hinted, Ayan, a set of tools to incorporate physical climate risks into the design, as noted by Anya, but as well management and indeed investing and investment in infrastructure. So we operate both at the national level to help develop some form of systemic analysis of a country's infrastructure exposure to physical climate risks, but also at the asset level. And I want to focus over the next few minutes on the work we've been doing at the asset level, which essentially is trying to address the issue that investors have when they look at an infrastructure and its exposure to climate change. They can see how transition risks might impact demand for services, but they have much more difficulty in looking at how physical climate risk will affect their asset. Everyone knows that it's likely to be the case, but it's actually very difficult to quantify and therefore mitigate, and also understand what the potential implication of such risks on the value of an asset longer term might be. And you've hinted at the notion of insurance. Obviously, the main practice today is to try and transfer such risks to the insurance community. The community has now been saying, look, with the rise of climate change and of risks becoming both more severe, but the likelihoods increasing as well, there may be a point when there is a mismatch between what the markets, the investors, the manager of the infrastructure require in terms of the insurance package and what might be available from the insurance industry. And so how do we try and prevent that? Because that would obviously lead to very significant value dislocation if it were to happen. And the answer that we've been developing at CCRI is to develop what we call a physical climate risk assessment methodology, otherwise known by its acronym of PCRAM. This was presented at COP26 in Glasgow and is now being implemented by a number of participating institutions. So let me tell you in a few words what the PCRAM is about. PCRAM essentially is a collaborative and iterative effort involving a combination of engineering professionals, climate data scientists, asset managers, and financiers. The purpose is to look at a specific location for an asset, to gather the climate data to identify relevant climate hazards for that particular asset over a long period of time, including climate scenarios, but also probabilistic analysis in terms of probabilities and severity of an hazard occurring, therefore looking at the vulnerability of that asset to these hazards, and very importantly, including the operational aspects, the economic and the financial aspects, including contractual obligations that an asset may have, to identify materiality thresholds. And that then would lead to a piece of work on developing resilience options to reduce the likelihood that the asset may breach these materiality thresholds. So to give you an example, if there's a risk of flooding that we know has a 1 in 50 chance of happening in the next 10 years, but we can see that that probability may rise to a 1 in a 10 chance of happening, say, in 30 years' time, then looking at the design of that asset, its operation, one obviously will want to identify options for mitigating the exposure to that risk. This could be physical options in terms of incremental capex. They can relate to operational aspects, perhaps an increase in OPEX, and they can also be linked to risk transfer. And so once we do that work on analyzing and comparing resilient options, then the last phase is to make the case for investment in one of these options, namely deploying more capital upfront to show the benefits of having a lower payout, a lower risk of damage, a lower potential reduction in revenues or increase in cost later on. And so that analysis then turns into a case for investing in resilience. Obviously, you have to deal with the time value of money. You have to show that take aside that time gap and show that actually it's better to, in most cases, invest now than to defer such investments, and that's overall you're essentially creating value for the underlying asset. The last point I would make is that we're suggesting that this methodology be repeated on a regular basis throughout the life of an asset, not just at its design phase or indeed at its commercial operation date, but also every time there is a refinancing, a major expansion, and indeed, very importantly, a transfer of ownership. Because after all, the main objective of what we're trying to do at CCRI is to avoid the value dislocation that I hinted at the beginning, to show regularly what the risks and the evolving risks that an asset is facing in relation to climate change are, to identify ways to mitigate them, and to decide at the best point in time, which may not necessarily be upfront, could be later on, once the risks have increased, to adjust and mitigate its risk through incremental investment. And I'll be happy to.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alex. So we have discussed already Africa faces a huge infrastructure gap under the business as usual. This is a heck of a lot of money, 2.3 trillion more infrastructure needs to be built, maybe 180 billion a year, 2.3 trillion in total. Then we have the added cost of the incremental cost of looking how to climate proof. Yes, the payoff will be there later, but usually, despite Africa proving that we are given respectable and very compelling returns, there is a gap in finance. We know that. There's a huge gap in finance. Governments were funding significant amount of infrastructure. Players like us are there. And so how do we now tap in to that global capital markets to come in? And Rajiv, this is where you come in. So maybe you can outline what's the approach from the Green Climate Fund, and how is physical risk and adaptation looked at, and what are the different ways of de-risking so that we could mobilize the trillions to come in this sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayan, and thanks for inviting me on to this panel. I would say first and foremost, a very happy 15 to AFC and to our partnership, and we look forward to deepening our engagement with yourselves. I would say I think the problem is quite real. The problem is of trillions, as you said, Ayan. But for trillions to be mobilized, I think you have two options. You will need multiple GCFs and multiple other similar multilateral institutions, or we could look at a slightly different approach where the multilateral institutions and institutions such as the GCF play a catalytic role in raising capital for these kind of investments that we are talking about over here. I think that's been our approach so far in general, and more specifically for climate resilient infrastructure as well. Whereas where we want to use our finite capital and leverage that to raise capital from the market in a predictable fashion. Now, if we're going to be talking about, let's say, raising capital from international capital markets, I think that's something which is going to be extremely lumpy. There are going to be black swan events like the one that we experienced over the last 2 years in COVID. And thereafter, now we are seeing the Ukraine crisis panning out. And these black swan events could significantly dampen the appetite that international investors could have for overseas exposures, whether it's Africa, Asia, or Latin America. In that scenario, I think there is also a need, and this is where we are thinking about, facilitating mechanisms by which a local capital can be raised, and that has the advantage of being a lot more predictable because it's local capital. We know the risk appetite of local investors. There's a matching of currency risks. And so it comes with a lot of positive benefits. But the flip side is that the local investors either do not have the risk appetite or do not have the requisite skills, capability, or knowledge to be investing in these kind of assets. And that is where we come in. We could potentially do structures such as credit enhancement. And use that credit enhancement to, let's say, raise capital from domestic pension funds, which are sitting on pools of capital, which is not being productively deployed in capital formation in economies. And that is something that we are very actively looking at. We believe that's a durable solution. We believe it addresses multiple issues. Such as black swan events and local currency financing can be raised through this mechanism. That is something that we would actively look at facilitating. And that way, we get over the problem of, capital finiteness that institutions such as us come with, and use a finite capital to mobilize additional capital raised from domestic institutions. This has been an idea that we have been working on for a while now. This is something that we would like to, at some point of time, aspirationally roll out in Africa and the rest of the world and the rest of the developing world. We believe once investors do get a flavor of this kind of investment and they see the predictable returns that infrastructure is generating for them, the appetite would increase and this would become a predictable source of capital for them. So increasingly, I would say that we would look at, deepening our cooperation with institutions such as the AFC to take some of these ideas to the ground.
Well, thank you so much. We are running out of time. So what I wanted to say is thank you to the entire panel. I think we looked at a country like Niger, what it faces, and try to really extrapolate what are the negotiators doing? What's the political machine that would centralize resilience and adaptation, especially in the run-up to COP27. I think Dr. Anya highlighted what are the scientific underpinnings against the resilience and the case for Africa, very important. We do have tools, and we are internally at AFC developing those tools that will integrate resilience across our portfolio. We are already, no one can replicate that. We already are doing the infrastructure, so integration of resilience is much easier. It is something that can be mainstream. And I think Rajiv has touched upon what are the concessional or the climate finance arena, which has not really supported much approaches to adaptation in the private sector could do to enhance the capability of an institution such as AFC. So I think, Mark, I know we're running out of time. I want to turn it over to you so that maybe there could be questions for the entire management team and all the previous presenters as well. Thank you, Mark Edo.
Thank you, Ayan, and thank you to the panelists for all those interesting interventions. There are indeed quite a number of questions. No, we don't have enough time to get through all of them. So perhaps maybe I'll read a couple of them. And then the idea, Ayan, is I'll hand back to you as the moderator to maybe manage the answers. And so let's get going. Charles Coker from London asks, to what extent do you think credit and political risk insurance will play a role in the transition of Africa? And will AFC use such insurance to leverage capital lending and capital relief? So just hold on to that question. And then question number 2 is, how do we de-risk? Simple question, how do we de-risk? In my view, MDBs, multilateral development banks, need to become risks mitigators to reduce risk, not just lenders. And finally, I'll leave you with one more. Professor Michelet Montina is asking, may AFC give more information about the asset management that it could offer to renewable energy developers? What are the requirements? Will AFC retain ownership of the leased asset throughout the lease period? I'll stop there, hand back to you, Ayan.
Okay, so I want to thank you. I think those questions, some of them, a lot of different people.
Ayan, I think we've lost your audio. Yes, so we didn't hear what you said. Okay, you're back.
Okay, perfect.
You're back.
I'm back. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for that question. I think we should slice some of those answers and some, if it's okay, on the renewable one. Sameh, if I can pass that one to you, so you can address that. So I think on the issue of should the government-funded, full taxpayer-funded multilateral take more risk and support the further de-risking of places like Africa, I fully agree with you. That is absolutely important. We have a lot more private capital, but we are in Africa. We are taking these risks. And AFC is funding from project development up to when a project is producing revenue, and maybe we would do some takeout financing. That is all the shareholder money and money that we are borrowing from the global capital markets that we are employing. So in that sense, there is no more risk-taking that one can say. As our president has highlighted, we do project development. That means we take an idea from a concept. We're not waiting for some of these projects to come fully baked, fully cooked, and revenue making. So we are able to take an idea, work with the government, look at what they need, and support that with our own capital. What we're saying here, that's not enough. We need to mobilize and to tap more. We now have a track record of 15 years. We can prove that we have done it, we can do it, and that I think it's time to basically de-risk. And you mentioned the role of insurance, either political or project. Absolutely, we do take that on, but there are times where we know we can manage that risk, and there is no reason to add an added layer of fees. But in some of the cases where the countries are way beyond investment grade, and there are much more real political or project related risk, we do have. I think if I can say maybe up to 20% of our portfolio is insured, but it's insured at using a very calculated approach that our CRO and others and the entire team uses to come up with that. But certainly, yes, I think yes, on both the MDBs that are tax funded, but also, yes, the use of insurance. But then you don't want to use all insurance because you should take some risks in order to get all the upside. So I'm going to ask my colleague, Sameh Shenouda, our Chief Investment Officer, to talk about the issue of the renewable.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you, Mark. On the question on asset management and what are the requirements for renewables, we have a very clear strategy to build a large renewable platform. And the challenge we see with renewables in Africa and how we can attract funding into these projects is the size of the project. Elsewhere in Europe and Asia and even in North America, the scale of the projects is very, very big. So for us to be a catalyst to attract third-party funding to come alongside us to invest in these projects, we need to build critical mass. And by building critical mass, we need to aggregate these projects. And the way we are approaching the aggregation strategy is a variety of things. First, as Ayan said, we do early stage development projects. So if you have a project and if you're developing it, and if you want support and the weight and the knowledge of someone like AFC to come and back you and get the project to the finish line, whether it's reaching financial close, reaching COD, or even operating it, then we would partner with the developer. We would develop the project and we would take it all the way to financial close. We also can partner with existing operators that have existing assets that are looking to expand, that are looking to grow in other countries where we have a presence, where we have access, where we have weight, and we have good relationships with the government. So we're very flexible in terms of when we come in. We can do it early, we can do it during construction or during development, and we can do it later if there is an expansion plan. In terms of the instruments that we use, yes, we can partner in equity. We can do also project finance. We can be lenders. And we usually like to partner with local partners who are on the ground and who know how to develop the project. So we will continue in the project as partners with the existing partners. In terms of the requirements, obviously every project has its own peculiarities, but generally the project has to be bankable. It has to be backed by a strong utility, and if the utility is not strong enough, we usually require government guarantees. But these are standard things that that we will work with the developer and the government to make sure that we can get to a bankable project that attracts also other lenders and other potential partners to get the project to the finish line. Thank you.
Back to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Ayan. I think there's another one specifically, and I think this one is, actually there are two questions about Liberia. So I'm going to combine the two, and perhaps we can bring in our CEO, Samaila Zubairo, if he wants to weigh in on this. Both questions are about Liberia. The first question says, as Liberia plays a significant role in climate safety globally, considering the size of the forest that has been managed, its forestry, is AFC considering exploring investment opportunities on this basis in Africa? I know you have an answer to that, but I'll let you answer it. And the second part, I guess, of the question is, additionally, Liberia being a low-income country facing human capital challenges, is AFC driving initiatives in this regard? How strategic is AFC in reaching countries not currently part of AFC? I will hand it to AFC. Maybe the president wants to weigh in first.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I think Liberia is a member country. So clearly we have a relationship with them. We actually have some of our colleagues from Liberia, and we're keen to work in Liberia. We actually have a mission plan, to engage with the government, and we would consider fast-tracking that mission so that we can have a framework for working with them on their infrastructural and industrial master plan. And since this question is really more around forests and how that can be protected, I would like to say that as AFC, we're very keen on acquiring forests and protecting them. We actually have a lot of forest already. We have over 2 million hectares of forest already, and we are continuing to grow that, because for us it's very important that we protect the forests that will be required as carbon sinks for the world. And we think that forest management is part of the way to enhance Africa's position, or Africa as a solution to the climate challenge. So yes, this is something that we can work with the government of Liberia on, and we're keen to have those conversations with them.
Okay, Ayan, thank you. I don't know if any of the other AFC team members want to weigh in, Sameh or anyone else on that. If not, maybe Ayan. Go ahead.
I can weigh in a little bit. Certainly, I think the speaker is absolutely right. West Africa and the DRC are the second largest lung in the world. As our president has said, we are going to roll out our strategy. We already have some exposure to this area, but I think you will see a much more targeted approach. Because if you look at Africa, really, Africa's mitigation story, and I listened very carefully to the previous panel, which highlighted the energy transition. Transition for Africa means protecting the forest, because that's where the biggest bang on CO2 is. And we happen to have between Liberia, Sierra Leone, Gabon, DRC, and parts of Nigeria and a bit of Ghana, we have a humongous lung that can reduce so much CO2 that Africa can actually burn.
I think we may have lost you again, Ayan. I apologize to all those people.
So no problem.
Yeah.
I think because when we talk about Africa's transition, the transition will happen through these carbon sinks. So I think this is absolutely critical. And as our president said, working with countries like Liberia, Sierra Leone, Gabon, and DRC will be a critical part of our next 15 years to ensure that we're working with them. And there is a plan to sustainably conserve the forest while providing livelihood for the people around it, and for the governments to also have a fair pricing for the carbon that will be coming out, which will be very scarce in the run-up to 2050.
Thank you, Ayan. Yeah, I think I'm looking at the time now, and I think we're out of time, unfortunately. This is a topic we could speak all day about. But I do know that your door is always open, and you and your team are keen to engage countries and members and anyone interested in developing and maturing the relationship with AFC. So thank you very much, Ayan Adam, AFC Capital Partners Head, for managing that very interesting panel. Thank you, panelists, also for being so interesting. But we're going to have to move on now to the next part and the final leg of this event. Now, last year, when he was campaigning to be the president of Niger, Mohamed Bazoum said he intends to turn Niger into an electricity exporting country. Well, we know that he won that election, and now President Bazoum is serious about making that dream a reality through Niger's relationship with AFC. AFC was delighted that Niger became our newest member, our 33rd country to join. And I'm pleased to present these remarks from His Excellency Mohamed Bazoum, President of the Republic of Niger.
Monsieur le Directeur Général de l'AFC, Mesdames et Messieurs les participants, je voudrais tout d'abord féliciter les organisateurs du présent symposium pour m'avoir associé aux discussions sur le financement des infrastructures résilientes au changement climatique, une des préoccupations majeures du développement et de l'intégration africaine. Je tiens également à exprimer mes vifs remerciements aux États membres de l'AFC qui ont approuvé l'adhésion du Niger à cette organisation en tant que nouvel État membre de l'institution. Ainsi, depuis novembre 2021, mon pays devient le 33e État membre de l'AFC, une institution de financement panafricaine de stature mondiale qui soutient le développement des infrastructures nécessaires au développement économique, à la création d'emplois et à la réduction de la pauvreté. Mesdames et Messieurs, pour rappel, le continent africain est le plus vulnérable à la variabilité au changement climatique du fait de sa forte dépendance à l'agriculture, une pauvreté généralisée et une faible capacité d'adaptation. En effet, comme je l'ai déjà souligné lors de la COP26 à Glasgow, les pays pauvres comme les nôtres qui n'ont aucune responsabilité dans le dérèglement climatique sont en effet ceux qui aujourd'hui payent le tribut le plus lourd. Le changement climatique représente un véritable défi pour les perspectives de développement socio-économique de l'Afrique, qui inclut entre autres la réalisation des objectifs de développement durable de l'agenda 2063 de l'Union africaine, la réalisation de la prospérité économique et l'amélioration du bien-être social des citoyens. Il est alors plus nécessaire que nous concevions des approches robustes qui donneraient une orientation unitaire, une cohérence soutenue, une détermination partagée et des initiatives collectives afin de relever ce défi. L'AFC représente ainsi une source importante de financement sur laquelle nous devons nous appuyer pour financer des infrastructures résilientes au changement climatique. Le Niger est actuellement en partenariat avec l'AFC dans un certain nombre de domaines, dont le chemin de fer Kano-Maradi. L'AFC est le conseiller financier et l'arrangeur principal mandaté pour la ligne principale Kano-Maradi de 284 km entre le Nigeria et le Niger. L'institution a été impliquée dans le développement de ce projet depuis le début du processus d'offre en août 2018. Les quelques 2,100 milliards de dollars requis pour le projet sont levés auprès d'un ensemble d'institutions de financement du développement, d'organismes de crédit à l'exportation ainsi que de banques commerciales locales et internationales. L'AFC, conformément à sa forte démonstration de soutien au projet, a engagé 150 millions de dollars à ce stade. Le projet devrait avoir un impact sur une population d'environ 8,8 millions de personnes, avec de nombreux effets sociaux et économiques positifs tels que la création d'emplois, la réduction des coûts de transport des personnes et des marchandises, les économies sur le coût d'entretien des routes, la réduction du nombre de victimes d'accidents de la route, la réduction des émissions de gaz à effet de serre, le renforcement de l'intégration régionale et du commerce entre le Nigeria, le Niger et d'autres pays voisins, et contribuera également à réduire le déficit d'infrastructures dans la sous-région. Le projet est développé conformément aux meilleures normes internationales, y compris les normes de performance de la Société financière internationale et les principes de l'Équateur. Les études et rapports pertinents sont préparés par des consultants de classe mondiale afin de garantir le développement d'un projet respectueux de l'environnement. Mesdames et messieurs, comme vous le savez, le nord du Nigeria et le sud du Niger souffrent de l'insécurité liée au banditisme et à la criminalité organisée ces dernières années. Un projet comme celui-ci permettra de relancer les activités économiques de la région et de stimuler la croissance économique. En outre, la réalisation de cette infrastructure permettra d'améliorer l'accessibilité de la région, ce qui renforcera l'intégration régionale et le commerce entre les pays voisins, notamment à la lumière de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine ZLECAf. Cette ligne ferroviaire donnera au Niger un accès au réseau ferroviaire et au port du Nigeria, ce qui facilitera l'acheminement des exportations nigériennes via le port de Lagos. Enfin, conformément à l'agenda vert du moment, ce projet permettra de réaliser d'importantes économies en matière de réduction de gaz à effet de serre, car les chemins de fer, vous le savez bien, émettent beaucoup moins de CO2 que les véhicules routiers. Le deuxième point de l'intervention de l'AFC, c'est le Fonds pour l'infrastructure résiliente au climat de l'AFC. Comme vous le savez, le Niger est l'un des pays au monde les plus vulnérables au changement climatique en raison de son exposition aux risques climatiques et de sa position enclavée. L'aggravation du changement climatique est particulièrement préoccupante pour un pays comme le nôtre, situé au cœur du Sahel, et menacé par une désertification implacable qui provoque l'ensablement des zones agricoles et pastorales. Ainsi, les discussions qui ont lieu dans le cadre de ce symposium sont importantes pour leur intérêt élevé au Niger et dans son environnement. Mesdames et messieurs, pour finir, Je suis convaincu que notre partenariat avec l'AFC Capital, par le biais de son fonds pour l'infrastructure résiliente face au climat, aidera le Niger à renforcer sa résilience à long terme face aux durs effets du changement climatique. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Well, thank you very much to His Excellency President S.E.M. Mohamed Bazoum, President of the Republic of Niger. We've come to the final part of what's been a very interesting 2 hours. And for the closing remarks, I will hand to the President and Chief Executive Officer of AFC, Samaila Zubairu.
Thank you, Mark. And I would like to join my colleagues and you in thanking all the participants for the very insightful discussions that we've had and for the long collaboration that we have with a lot of the partners and for the new partners that we've acquired through this forum. I want to assure you of our commitment to work with you on our journey to make Africa a more prosperous and instrumental continent to the world. So as a run-up to this process, we've done a lot of review of some transactions that we would like to announce, as part of this program. So part of our medium-term product diversification strategy, 2018 to 2020, is anchored on providing tailored and effective support to African states by expanding our public sector interventions, by providing treasury liquidity support to African sovereigns, central banks, and state-owned enterprises, supporting other financial institutions, national and regional development banks, commercial banks, to facilitate African trade and export through the provision of short and medium-term liquidity facilities, trade finance lines, and guarantees. In the run-up to this year's Country and Stakeholder Symposium, we had a series of investment review sessions focused on these key product lines. I am pleased to inform you that 11 transactions were tabled for review, out of which 7 deals worth $1.3 billion have secured investment interest from AFC. Key highlights include up to $910 million in treasury liquidity solutions, which includes currency swaps, interest rate solutions, and repo market structures, to central banks, ministries of finance, and commercial banks in East and Southern Africa. Up to $100 million on lending facility to 2 reputable regional and national development finance institutions in West Africa and Southern Africa. Short T-bonds in favor of 2 Senegal power projects with a combined generation capacity of 240 megawatts. These projects are broadly in line with our mandate to provide innovative, proactive, and impactful solutions to all our stakeholders alike, public and private sector. While our core business remains delivery of quality and sustainable infrastructure and industrial projects for the continent, as we have done steadily and successfully over the last 15 years. The inclusion and development of these new product lines solidifies our moniker as a holistic solutions provider. In addition, the AFC is pleased to announce the launch of its $2 billion facility to support COVID-19 economic recovery in Africa. The COVID-19 pandemic has set back Africa's economic growth trajectory and further widened the trade financing gap. As such, AFC is determined to play a leading role in shaping the continent's recovery, not only through the work that we do in bridging Africa's infrastructure gap, but also through boosting trade finance capacity, promoting access to funding and capital flows, and stimulating extra African trade to support the growth and development of our continent. In this regard, AFC is pleased to announce the launch of a $2 billion facility to boost trade financing and funding in Africa. The facility will reinvigorate the continent's economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and provide a much-needed support towards a sustainable economic development of the continent. The facility, dubbed Rebuilding Economic Resilience, will be disbursed via loans and guarantees from AFC to eligible commercial banks, regional development banks, and central banks in Africa. This will promote economic development in Africa in that it will provide financial institutions with much needed hard currency liquidity for on-lending to their clients, including SMEs, to support import and export trade flows, local beneficiation, and import substitution initiatives. African financial institutions can apply for this facility through our website, www.africafc.org, and more information about the process will also be provided in subsequent communications from AFC. We also have bilateral links to a lot of these financial institutions, and we'll use that medium to provide them access to this product. Through this funding intervention, AFC will accelerate its development impact in Africa, drive the continent to a new phase of growth that is focused on maximum resource value capture and domestic job creation. If you recall, Dr. Vera Sangwe in her remarks discussed the joint study that we have conducted with them on producing battery precursors in DRC. And she also mentioned the significant jump, in going through the end of the value chain. So she mentioned that DRC currently earns about 7 billion from the export of cobalt in an 11 billion market, but the battery market is $1.7 trillion. So you can see the difference. And that's why it's very important for us to ensure that we are capturing more value. Yesterday at our event, I also gave an example of the textile industry and garmenting industry, where a country is exporting currently about $2 billion, from the export of cotton, but that if that is extended to garmenting, we can go to $39.640 billion. And this is something that we can do, and this is something that we are keen to work with our member countries, African countries in general, our partners, to ensure that we enhance the value capture for African produce and commodities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for ending that with an important announcement of a $2 billion facility to provide countries with the much needed liquidity they need for COVID-19 recovery. Now, it's easy to find out how your country can become a member of AFC and join Niger, Morocco, Egypt, Kenya, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and many other countries that have AFC by their sides as they seek to build the infrastructure that will change economies and change lives. You can email us at countryrelations@africafc.org, or you can reach out directly to the AFC executives you've heard from today. That concludes the second Africa Finance Corporation Country and Stakeholder Symposium. We'll leave you with a short video celebrating our 15th anniversary and revealing AFC's new brand identity. I'm
Mark, before you do that, please, I'd like to thank my colleagues who have worked so tirelessly to put this together. I'd like to commend the excellent facilitation by Sameh Shinuda and Ayan, as well as the wonderful remarks we got from Sanjeev and the comments we also got from Osam. I thank you all for your continued commitment to make Africa a more prosperous continent and to make Africa instrumental to the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Samilan. Thank you for your excellent leadership. You always say AFC's power is its people. Now, we'll leave you with a short video celebrating our 50th anniversary and revealing AFC's new brand identity. I'm Mark Edo. See you again soon.